The saloon exploded with laughter when she stepped inside. Mud-caked dress, trembling hands clutching homemade preserves worth more than the insults being hurled at her face. But before Lydia Mercer could run back into the storm, a scarred mountain hunter did something that would change the entire frontier. He chose her. The worthless fat girl, the burden, the joke. What happened next in those frozen mountains turned a broken woman into a legend that terrified the powerful and gave hope to the desperate. This is her story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The storm hit Black Ash Ridge like a fist. Rain hammered the mud streets into rivers of filth, while wind ripped loose boards from buildings that barely deserved the name. Inside Murphy's saloon, oil lamps swayed on rusted chains, casting shadows that made every drunk look like a demon and every card game look like a funeral. Lydia Mercer stood outside in the downpour, staring at the saloon doors like they were the gates of hell, which, in fairness, they were. Her canvas sack hung heavy against her hip. 12 jars of blackberry preserves, each one representing hours of labor her father would never acknowledge, and money he'd already spent in his head. The jars clinked together as her hand shook, not from cold, but from the sick certainty that walking through those doors would end badly. It always did. But she needed the money, needed it worse than dignity, worse than pride, worse than the small voice in her head begging her to just go home. Home. As if that word meant anything besides a leaking shack and a man who looked at her like she was something that should have been drowned at birth. Lydia pushed through the doors. The noise hit her first, men shouting over cards, bottles slamming on tables, someone singing off-key about a woman in Dodge City. Then the smell. Whiskey, sweat, tobacco, and something else. Something rotten that seemed to live in the walls. For about 3 seconds, nobody noticed her. Then somebody did. Jesus Christ, look at what the storm dragged in. The voice belonged to Wade Hickson, a ranch hand with a face like a sunburned potato and a personality to match. He sat at a corner table with 5 other men, all of them already drunk enough to think they were funny. Lydia kept her eyes down and moved toward the bar where Murphy, fat, bald, permanently annoyed Murphy, was pouring whiskey like it was medicine. "Murphy," she said quietly, "I brought the preserves you ordered last week. 12 jars, like you said." Murphy didn't look up. Didn't order nothing. Her stomach dropped. "Yes, you did. You said you needed them for—" "I said maybe I'd take some if they were any good. You bring me a sample." "You didn't say anything about a sample. You said—" "Well, I'm saying it now." Murphy finally looked at her, his expression somewhere between bored and disgusted. "And I ain't buying 12 jars of nothing without tasting it first." Behind her, Wade's table had gone quiet in that specific way that meant they were paying attention. Waiting. Lydia fumbled with the sack, pulling out 1 jar and setting it on the bar with shaking hands. "Here, you can try this one." Murphy made a show of examining it like she'd handed him a jar of pig shit. He cracked it open, sniffed it, then dipped 1 finger in and tasted it with all the enthusiasm of a man checking for poison. "It's all right," he grunted. "I'll give you 50 cents for all 12. 50 cents? The words came out louder than she meant them. "Murphy, we agreed on $2. That's less than 5 cents a jar. I don't remember agreeing to nothing." He screwed the lid back on and slid the jar back toward her. 50 cents or get out. Storm's making me generous." From Wade's table, someone laughed. Not loud, just enough. Lydia felt heat crawling up her neck. "These took me 2 days to make. The berries alone cost—" "Then you're a bad businesswoman," Murphy cut her off. 50 cents. Final offer." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Murphy's face twisted into something ugly. "You want to talk about fair? Fair is you taking up space in my saloon looking like a drowned cow and expecting me to pay city prices for jam. 50 cents or nothing. Choose fast. You're driving away customers." The saloon had gone completely quiet now. Even the piano player had stopped. Lydia's throat felt like it was closing. She could feel every eye on her, measuring, judging, enjoying the show. This was the part where she was supposed to take the money and leave. Take the humiliation and wear it like she'd worn every other humiliation in her 26 years. She opened her mouth to accept. "She looks like she ate the berries instead of selling them," Wade called out, and the table exploded with laughter. Something cracked inside her. $2, Lydia said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. That's the price. That's what they're worth. Murphy stared at her like she'd just spat in his drink. You got some nerve. They're worth $2, she repeated, louder now. You know it, and I know it. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for what's fair. Fair. Wade stood up now, swaying slightly. You want fair? Fair is us not charging you rent for taking up air in here. He walked toward her with the lazy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Fair is, hey Wade, one of his friends called out. Maybe she'll trade. You need a new mule, don't you? The laughter that followed was vicious. Wade grinned, circling Lydia like she was livestock. Nah, my mule's got better teeth. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. But I'll tell you what, sweetheart. You want $2? I got $2. Question is, what you're willing to do for it. His hand reached for her waist. Lydia jerked back so hard she stumbled into a table, sending cards and coins scattering. The room erupted, some men laughing, others shouting about their game, Wade lunging forward like this was all part of the entertainment. She tried to run for the door, but her dress caught on a chair, and suddenly she was falling, jars crashing out of the sack and exploding across the floor in a spray of glass and blackberry preserves. The laughter was deafening. Lydia scrambled on her hands and knees, trying to gather the unbroken jars, while Wade stood over her making pig noises. Someone threw a coin at her. It bounced off her shoulder. There's your 50 cents, pig girl. Another coin hit her back. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only grab at jars with hands that wouldn't stop shaking while the entire saloon laughed at the fat, worthless girl on her knees and broken glass and ruined work, and a boot stepped into her field of vision. Not Wade's boot. This one was different. Worn leather, mountain-made, attached to legs that looked like they were carved from the same wood as the trees outside. The laughter cut off like someone had slit its throat. Lydia looked up. The man standing over her was enormous, not fat, enormous in the way that mountains are enormous, like he'd been built by something that didn't understand human scale. He wore a coat made from animal pelts stitched together with what looked like sinew, and his face was a roadmap of scars half hidden by a dark beard. She'd seen him around town maybe 3 times in her entire life, never spoken to him, never gotten close enough to see the color of his eyes. Elias Boone, the mountain hunter, the man parents used to scare children into behaving. He looked down at Lydia for exactly 2 seconds, then turned to face Wade. She said $2. His voice was quiet, barely louder than the rain still hammering outside, but it cut through the room like a knife through skin. Wade's grin faltered. This ain't your business, Boone. $2, Elias repeated, still quiet, still terrible. Pay her. Like hell Elias moved so fast it didn't look real. 1 second he was standing still. The next his hand was around Wade's throat, lifting him onto his toes like he weighed nothing. $2, Elias said again, or I break your neck and pay her myself with what's in your pockets. Choose fast. Wade made a strangled sound that might have been agreement. Elias dropped him. Wade collapsed, gasping, while his friends suddenly found their drinks extremely interesting. Murphy, Elias said without turning around. $2. Now. Murphy's hand shook as he counted out coins onto the bar. Elias scooped them up and dropped them into Lydia's palm. The metal was still warm from Murphy's sweaty hands. Pick up what's not broken, Elias told her. Leave the rest. Lydia's brain had stopped working somewhere around the time Elias lifted Wade off the ground. She stared at the coins in her hand like they were a foreign language. Now, Elias added, and that got her moving. She gathered the 5 unbroken jars with hands that felt disconnected from her body, hyper-aware of the absolute silence in the saloon. When she stood, Elias was watching the room like a man expecting an attack. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Outside, Elias said to Lydia. She followed him through the doors into the rain. The storm had gotten worse. Water came down in sheets, turning the street into a river and the sky into a solid wall of black. Lydia stood there shaking, from cold, from shock, from the delayed understanding of what had just happened, while Elias studied her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. You got somewhere to be? He asked. Home, she managed. I need to get home. Where's home? Edge of town, the shack past the church. Elias knew it. Everyone knew it. The falling down shack where drunk Samuel Mercer lived with his fat daughter who nobody wanted. Your father send you out in this? Lydia didn't answer, didn't need to. Elias was quiet for a long moment, rain dripping off his beard. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Still quiet, but with something else underneath. How old are you? 26. You got skills besides making preserves? The question was so unexpected, Lydia almost laughed. I can cook, clean. I know some healing. My mother used to... She stopped. Talking about her mother to a stranger in the rain felt wrong. Why? I need help, Elias said simply. Up in the mountains, cooking, cleaning, tending things while I'm gone hunting. It's hard work, harder than anything you've done. But you'd have a roof, food, and nobody calling you names. Lydia stared at him. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a way out. Out of what? Elias gestured at the town around them. The saloon still full of laughing drunks, the muddy streets, the shacks leaning against each other like dying men. This, all of it. You stay here, you know what happens. You've always known. He was right, she had always known. Staying in Black Ash Ridge meant more nights like tonight, more years of her father's silent hatred, more humiliation until it finally killed something inside her that couldn't grow back. But leaving meant, I don't know you, she said. No, you could be worse than anything here. Could be. Why would you want someone like me? The question came out broken, ugly. All the poison Wade and Murphy and her father had poured into her over the years condensed into 4 words. Elias looked at her dead on. Because you stood up and asked for what you were worth. Most people can't even do that. I was on my knees in broken glass. After you stood up, Elias corrected. That's what matters. Standing up, not staying down. Lydia laughed, and it came out like something dying. I don't know how to do what you're asking. I can barely... You'll learn, or you won't, and I'll bring you back. But you'll learn. He tilted his head, studying her. Question is whether you want to try. When would we leave? Dawn. Before the town wakes up. You bring whatever you can carry, nothing else. My father will drink himself to death whether you're here or not, Elias said, brutal in his honesty. He doesn't want you. He wants a target. Difference is important. The words should have hurt. Instead, they felt like lancing a wound. Lydia looked back at the saloon. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see the men inside, already forgetting about her, laughing about something new. In an hour, they wouldn't remember her name. She thought about going back to the shack, handing her father the $2, watching him count it with shaking hands before stumbling to the saloon to turn it back into whiskey. She thought about tomorrow, next week, next year. The same humiliation on repeat until she either died or became so numb she might as well be dead. Okay, she heard herself say. Elias nodded once. Dawn, don't be late. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain like he'd never been there at all. Lydia made it back to the shack soaking wet and shivering so hard her teeth rattled. Her father was passed out in his chair, an empty bottle on the floor beside him. He'd be out until morning. Probably wouldn't even notice she'd left until he needed something and she wasn't there to get it. She stood in the doorway, dripping water on the dirt floor, looking at the man who'd given her life, and then spent 26 years making her regret it. Samuel Mercer had been handsome once. Lydia had seen the daguerreotype of him and her mother on their wedding day. Young, smiling, full of the kind of hope that the frontier ground into dust. Then her mother died in childbirth with Lydia's stillborn brother, and something in Samuel died with her. What was left had blamed Lydia for surviving when the son didn't. She should have felt something looking at him now. Anger, sadness, fear about leaving. Instead, she felt nothing. That scared her more than Elias Boone ever could. Lydia moved quietly through the shack, gathering what little she owned. 2 dresses, both patched and faded. Her mother's shawl, the only nice thing she had left. A small leather journal her mother had used for recipes and remedies. Lydia had never been able to throw it away. She packed it all into a canvas bag that weighed almost nothing. 26 years of life fit into one bag. The thought should have been depressing. Instead, it felt like freedom. Lydia sat on her thin mattress and waited for dawn. listening to her father snore and the rain hammer the roof and her own heart beating too fast. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Elias could be lying, could be dangerous, could be planning things that made Wade Hickson look gentle. But staying here was a guaranteed death sentence. Just slower, more humiliating. At least leaving offered a chance. The sky started to lighten around 5. Lydia stood, shouldered her bag, and took one last look at the shack. Her father stirred but didn't wake. She thought about leaving a note. Couldn't think of anything worth saying, so she just left. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still rivers of mud. Lydia walked toward the edge of town where Elias said he'd be waiting, her boots squelching with every step. The town was dead quiet. Too early for anyone except the drunk who hadn't made it home yet. She found Elias exactly where he'd said he'd be, standing beside 2 horses loaded with supplies. He looked her over once, nodded, and handed her the reins to the smaller horse. "You know how to ride?" "Not really." "You'll learn. Get on." Getting on proved harder than it sounded. The horse was tall and Lydia was short and heavy, and the saddle seemed designed specifically to humiliate her. She tried 3 times before Elias just lifted her up and deposited her in the saddle like a sack of flour. "Hold the reins. Don't fall off." Then he mounted his horse and started riding. Lydia grabbed the saddle horn with both hands and tried not to panic as her horse followed Elias's automatically. They rode out of Black Ash Ridge as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the sky orange and gold. Lydia looked back once. The town looked small from here. Temporary. Like it could be blown away by a strong wind and nobody would notice. She didn't look back again. The first day nearly killed her. Elias set a brutal pace, following trails that barely existed through forest so thick it blocked out the sun. Lydia had never been on a horse for more than 10 minutes. Now she was on one for hours, every step sending jolts of pain through her back and legs, and places she didn't know could hurt. She didn't complain. Couldn't complain, really. Her teeth were clenched so tight against the pain that speaking seemed impossible. Elias stopped once around noon, handing her some dried meat and water without comment. Lydia tried to dismount, and her legs gave out the second she hit the ground. She collapsed in a heap, pain screaming through every muscle. Elias crouched beside her. "Can you keep going?" She wanted to say no, wanted to admit this was a mistake, wanted to beg him to take her back. Instead, she said, "Yes." He helped her up, got her back on the horse. They kept riding. By sunset, Lydia was hallucinating from pain and exhaustion. She saw shapes in the trees that weren't there, heard voices in the wind, kept thinking she was about to fall off the horse and only staying on through some miracle of muscle memory. When Elias finally stopped, Lydia didn't wait to be helped down. She just fell off the horse and lay on the ground, staring at the darkening sky while her body screamed. "Get up," Elias said. She couldn't. "Get up," he repeated, "or you'll freeze." With effort that felt superhuman, Lydia dragged herself to her feet. Elias had already started a fire and was unloading supplies. He gestured to a pile of wood. "Fire needs feeding. Do it." She did it. Hands shaking. Body barely responding. But she did it. "There's a stream 20 yards that way. We need water." She got the water. "Beans in that pack? Cook them." She cooked them, even though she burned the first batch and had to start over. Through all of it, Elias said nothing. Just watched her struggle and fail and try again. They ate in silence. The beans were terrible, overcooked and undersalted, and somehow both mushy and hard at the same time. Elias ate them without comment. When they finished, Lydia finally spoke. "Why did you really choose me?" Elias poked at the fire with a stick. "Told you already. Nobody offers a stranger a job for standing up, especially not someone like me." "Someone like you," Elias repeated, and there was something sharp in his tone. "You mean fat, poor, unwanted." The words hit like fists. Lydia looked away. "I had a daughter once," Elias said quietly. "Wife, too. Fever took them both about 8 years back. Daughter was 6. Lydia's breath caught. She was small, sickly. Other kids made fun of her. Adults, too, sometimes. Like being weak was something shameful. He threw the stick into the fire. "My wife begged me to move to a town where there was a doctor, someone who could help. I said no. Said we didn't need town medicine. Said the mountains made us strong." He went quiet for a long time. "I was wrong," he said finally. "Fever hit in winter. Took them both in 3 days. I buried them under snow so hard I broke 2 shovels. Lydia didn't know what to say. Didn't think there was anything to say. I don't choose people because they're perfect, Elias continued. I choose them because they refuse to quit when quitting makes sense. You could have taken 50 cents, could have run out of that saloon, could have stayed home tonight and spent the rest of your life making preserves for men who treat you like livestock. He looked at her. But you didn't. That's worth something. I don't know if I can do this, Lydia whispered. You can't, Elias said simply. Not yet, but you will. Out here, people learn fast or die. You don't seem like the dying type. Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the fear, Lydia smiled. It felt strange on her face, like using muscles that had forgotten their purpose. The second day was worse than the first. Lydia woke up so stiff she couldn't move without whimpering. Her inner thighs were raw from the saddle. Her hands were blistered from gripping the reins. Even breathing hurt. Elias kicked dirt over the fire. Time to move. I can't. You can. I literally cannot move my legs. Elias walked over and hauled her to her feet. Lydia's legs buckled, but he held her upright until they remembered how to work. Walk it off, he said. 5 minutes. It took 10, but eventually Lydia could move without crying. Elias got her on the horse, and they started riding again. The landscape changed as they climbed higher. The trees grew thicker, older, twisted into shapes that looked angry. The air got colder, thinner. Lydia found herself gasping for breath on inclines that Elias's horse climbed without effort. Around midday they passed a frozen stream, and Lydia saw their reflection in the ice. She looked terrible, hair matted with sweat and dirt, face pale and drawn, eyes too big for her face. She looked like she was dying. Maybe she was. They rode until dark, stopped, and went through the same routine: fire, water, food. Lydia's cooking was slightly less terrible than the night before. Elias's lack of comment felt like high praise. That night she dreamed of the saloon, of Wade's hand reaching for her, of the laughter that followed her like a disease. She woke up gasping, heart hammering. Elias was already awake, staring into the fire. Bad dream? How did you know? Everyone has bad dreams up here. Eventually you learn to live with them. Lydia pulled her mother's shawl tighter around her shoulders. How long until we get to your cabin? Another day, maybe 2 if weather turns. What's it like? Elias considered. Isolated, cold, nothing like town. Good, Lydia said, and meant it. They reached the cabin on the 3rd day, just as snow started to fall. It sat in a clearing halfway up a mountain, surrounded by pines so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. The cabin itself was larger than Lydia expected, built from logs chinked with moss, with a stone chimney and shuttered windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lydia looked at Elias. Someone's here? No, he said. I never let the fire die completely. Easier to restart. They dismounted, Lydia falling more than climbing down, and Elias unlocked the door. The inside was sparse but functional. One large room with a stone fireplace, a rough table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a ladder leading to a sleeping loft. Furs covered the floor. Herbs hung drying from the rafters. It smelled like wood smoke and wild things. Loft is yours, Elias said, already unloading supplies. I sleep down here. Fire needs tending every few hours through the night. We take turns. What about outhouse is behind the cabin? Don't go out after dark without a light. Bears. Bears, Lydia repeated faintly. Wolves, too, but mostly bears. He said it like he was mentioning the weather. Lydia climbed the ladder to the loft and found a simple bed frame stuffed with pine needles and covered with furs. It was the roughest bed she'd ever seen. It felt like luxury compared to her mattress back in Black Ash Ridge. She collapsed onto it and immediately fell asleep. The first week was a blur of failure and pain. Elias expected her to learn everything immediately: how to maintain the fire, cook over open flame, preserve meat, identify which herbs were medicine and which were poison, fix torn clothing, render fat, make candles, and 100 other tasks Lydia had never even considered. She failed at all of them. Burned the food, let the fire die, cut herself preparing meat, ruined a deer hide Elias had specifically told her to treat carefully. Every failure made her expect him to yell, to hit her, to tell her she was worthless, like her father always had. Instead, Elias just showed her how to do it correctly, then made her try again. "Why aren't you angry?" she asked one night after destroying another meal. "What good would that do? Everyone else gets angry when I mess up." "Everyone else is an idiot," Elias said simply. "You don't learn by being afraid. You learn by trying until it works. What if it never works? Then you try something else." It was the most revolutionary thing anyone had ever said to her. Winter hit hard and fast. Snow piled up around the cabin until the windows were half buried. The temperature dropped so low that water froze inside the cabin overnight. Lydia woke up one morning with frost in her hair and her breath visible in the air. Elias taught her to survive it, how to layer clothing, how to recognize frostbite, how to move through snow without exhausting herself, how to listen for the crack of ice that meant danger. He also taught her to chop wood. Lydia's first swing with the axe nearly took off her foot. The second buried the blade in the stump without splitting the log. By the 10th, she was crying from frustration and pain. "Stop," Elias said. "I can't do it." "You're doing it wrong. There's a difference." He positioned her hands correctly on the axe. "It's not about strength. It's about letting the weight of the axe do the work. Try again." She tried again. The log split. Lydia stared at it like she'd performed a miracle. "Again," Elias said. She split 10 more logs before her arms gave out. When she came inside, her hands were bleeding and she could barely lift them. Elias bandaged them without comment. The next day, she split 20 logs. The day after that, 30. Her hands calloused over. Her arms grew stronger. Her breathing adjusted to the thin mountain air. She was changing, and she didn't even realize it. The deer arrived in late January. Elias brought it in with a bullet wound through its shoulder, bleeding and half dead. He laid it on the floor near the fire and pulled out his knife. "Animals suffering," he said. "Fastest thing is to—" "Wait." Lydia knelt beside the deer. It was young, maybe a yearling, with big dark eyes that looked at her with something that might have been understanding. "We could try to save it. Waste of time. Even if it survives, it'll never run right again. But we could try." Elias studied her. "You know anything about fixing bullet wounds in animals?" "No," Lydia admitted. "But my mother used to help injured things. I watched her. I remember some of it. Some of it might kill the animal slower. Doing nothing definitely kills it." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he sheathed his knife. "Your time. Your responsibility. Don't expect me to help." Lydia didn't. She worked on the deer through the night, using memories of watching her mother treat similar injuries years ago. She cleaned the wound, packed it with herbs she thought were right, stitched the torn flesh with thread that shook in her hands. The deer made sounds that haunted her. By dawn, it was still alive, but barely. Lydia sat beside it, exhausted and covered in blood, certain it would die any minute. It didn't die that day, or the next. On the third day, it lifted its head and drank water from her hands. Elias watched from across the cabin, saying nothing. The deer lived for another week before an infection took it in the night. Lydia found it dead one morning, already going stiff. She cried harder than she had in years. "You did good," Elias said, and it was the first time he'd commented on the whole thing. "It died anyway. Everything dies. What matters is you fought for it." He gestured to the deer's body. "Most people would have killed it immediately, called it mercy. You gave it a week it wouldn't have had. That counts." "Does it?" "More than you know." 3 days later, a trapper arrived at the cabin half frozen and delirious with fever. Elias looked at Lydia. "Your choice." She didn't hesitate. "Get him inside." The trapper's name was Jacob, and he was dying. The fever had him so bad he didn't know where he was or what year it was. He thrashed and screamed things that didn't make sense while Lydia tried to remember everything her mother had taught her about breaking fevers. Cold water, specific herbs, keep them hydrated, monitor their breathing. She did all of it while Elias watched silently from the shadows. Jacob survived. When he left a week later, he looked at Lydia like she'd performed a miracle. "You saved my life. I just did what my mother taught me. Most people wouldn't have tried. I'm nobody to you." "Everyone's somebody," Lydia said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. After Jacob left, more people came. A woman who'd fallen and broken her leg. A child with the infection that was spreading. An old man who'd been mauled by something in the woods. They came because word spread fast in the mountains. There was a woman up in Elias Boone's cabin who could fix things doctors couldn't. Lydia saved most of them. Lost some too. Each death carved something new inside her. Each survival built something she didn't have a name for yet. One night, after successfully treating a hunter's infected wound, Elias finally spoke what they were both thinking. "You're good at this." Lydia looked at her hands, scarred now, calloused, steady in ways they'd never been before. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time." "Nobody does. But you try anyway. That's what matters." "What if I kill someone?" "You will," Elias said with brutal honesty. "Eventually you'll try your best and it won't be enough. Question is whether you quit when that happens." "Do you think I will?" Elias looked at her, really looked at her, the way nobody had before. Not with judgment or pity or disgust, with something that might have been respect. "No," he said. "I don't think you quit at anything anymore." Lydia realized he was right. Somewhere between Black Ash Ridge and this frozen cabin, between broken jars and bleeding hands, between the scared girl in the saloon and the woman who fought to save a dying deer, she'd become someone new, someone who didn't know how to stay down, someone who was just starting to understand what that might mean. Spring came late to the mountains, arriving in increments so small Lydia almost missed them. First the snow melted enough to see ground, then the ice on the stream cracked and broke. Then one morning she woke up and heard birds. She'd survived her first winter. The realization hit her while she was chopping wood, something she now did without thinking, her arms swinging the axe in rhythm while her mind wandered. She stopped mid-swing and just stood there, breathing hard, looking at the pile of split logs she'd created. Last year she couldn't split one log without crying. Now she could split 50 without breaking a sweat. "You all right?" Elias called from where he was repairing a trap. "Yeah," Lydia called back. Then, quieter, to herself, "Yeah, I think I am." That night a group of travelers arrived, a family heading west who'd gotten turned around in the mountains. The mother was pregnant and having contractions too early. The father was panicked. The two children were terrified. Lydia looked at Elias. He looked back. She knew what he was saying without words. "This one's yours, all of it." So she took it. She examined the mother, determined the baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not, and started preparing. Elias boiled water and gathered clean cloth, while Lydia tried to remember every story her mother had told about difficult births. The labor lasted 8 hours. The baby came out blue and silent. Lydia's heart stopped. Then she remembered something. Her mother talking about babies who forgot to breathe, how sometimes you had to remind them. She cleared the baby's mouth and nose, rubbed its chest hard, breathed gentle air into its tiny lungs. The baby gasped, then cried. The sound was the most beautiful thing Lydia had ever heard. The family stayed for 3 days while the mother recovered. When they left, the father tried to pay Lydia with the last of their money. She refused. "Just tell people where you found help. That's payment enough." After they left, Elias handed her a cup of coffee, and they sat outside watching the sunset. "You know what you are?" he asked. "What?" "A healer," Elias said simply. "A real one. Not a doctor with fancy papers, someone who actually saves lives." Lydia tested the word in her mind. Healer. It fit better than anything else ever had. "What do I do with that?" she asked. "Same thing you've been doing. Keep trying, keep learning, keep refusing to quit when it matters. And when I fail, you learn from it," Elias said. "Then you try again." Lydia thought about the girl she'd been in Black Ash Ridge, the one who'd knelt in broken glass while men laughed, the one who'd believed she deserved every insult, every humiliation, every moment of hatred her father poured into her. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, scarred, still learning, still failing sometimes, but not broken, not anymore. "Thank you," Lydia said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something in me I couldn't see." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't see anything that wasn't already there. I just gave it room to grow." They sat in comfortable silence while the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars began to appear. Lydia Mercer had survived. Now it was time to see what else she could do. The second year changed everything, though Lydia wouldn't understand how much until it was already too late to go back. Summer brought heat that turned the cabin into an oven and drew people up from the valleys like the mountains were calling them home. They came with injuries that should have killed them days ago, infections spreading like wildfire, bones broken in ways that made Lydia's stomach turn, fevers so high she could feel the heat radiating off them from across the room. She saved more than she lost, but the ones she lost stayed with her. A miner named Thomas, who'd crushed his hand in a cave-in. Lydia had fought the infection for 6 days before it took him anyway. His last words a whispered apology to a wife who'd never hear it. A child, maybe 8 years old, who'd eaten something poisonous. Lydia had tried everything her mother's journal mentioned and things she made up in desperation. The girl died convulsing while her father held her and Lydia stood there useless, her hands still covered in remedies that hadn't worked. After the girl died, Lydia walked into the woods and screamed until her throat bled. Elias found her an hour later, sitting against a tree with her knees pulled to her chest. "I killed her," Lydia said. "No, you didn't. I gave her the wrong thing. I should have known." "You gave her the only chance she had," Elias cut her off. "Her father brought her here already dying. You fought for her anyway. That's not killing. That's trying. Trying isn't good enough. It's all anyone has." Lydia looked at him through tears that wouldn't stop. "How do you live with it? The ones you can't save?" Elias was quiet for a long time. "You carry them. Learn from them. Make sure the next one has a better chance." He crouched down beside her. "And you don't quit just because it hurts. Because if you quit, the next person dies without even getting to try." "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "You are," Elias said with the same certainty he used for everything. "You just don't believe it yet." That night, Lydia pulled out her mother's journal and started writing in the blank pages at the back. Every patient, every treatment, what worked, what failed, what she'd try differently next time. She filled 3 pages before the candle burned out. The next morning, a woman arrived in labor with twins. Lydia didn't hesitate. She delivered both babies alive, and when their mother cried with relief, Lydia felt something shift inside her. Not redemption, the dead girl's face would haunt her forever, but purpose. She couldn't save everyone, but she could save the ones she could. That had to be enough. By autumn, Lydia's reputation had spread beyond the immediate mountains into territories she'd never even heard of. Traders mentioned her name in passing. Families planned routes that went past Elias's cabin just in case. Even the occasional doctor, real ones with medical training and certificates, started showing up to see if the stories were true. Most of them left unimpressed. "You're using folk remedies," one doctor told her, after watching her treat an infected wound with a poultice made from local plants. He was maybe 40, well-dressed, with the kind of condescending tone that made Lydia's teeth ache. "Half of these treatments have no medical basis." "They work," Lydia said simply, cleaning her hands in a water basin. "Coincidence. The body heals itself more often than not." "Then why do people die when doctors treat them?" His face went red. "Because medicine is complex. It requires education, training, understanding of anatomy, and—" "I understand anatomy," Lydia interrupted. "I've stitched up enough people to know where everything goes. And I know which plants reduce fever, which ones fight infection, which ones help with pain. My mother taught me some. The rest I learned by trying." "That's not education. That's guesswork." "Guesswork that saves lives," Elias said from the corner where he'd been watching the exchange. "You done insulting her? Patients waiting outside." The doctor looked between them, clearly wanting to continue the argument. Instead, he grabbed his bag and left, muttering about ignorance and dangerous practices. After he was gone, Lydia sat down heavily. Maybe he's right. He's not. He has medical training. I have a dead mother's journal and luck. Elias walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. "You have something better than training. You give a damn whether people live or die. Half those educated doctors treat patients like problems to solve. You treat them like people worth saving." "That doesn't make up for not knowing things." "Then learn them," Elias said simply. "You're already writing everything down. Keep doing that. Learn from every patient, every mistake, every success. 5 years from now, you'll know things that doctor never will, because you earned it in blood instead of reading it in books." Lydia looked at her hands, permanently stained now with things that wouldn't wash out. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm just making things worse? Then you'll figure it out and fix it, Elias said. That's what you do. You don't give up, remember? She did remember. It was getting harder to remember the girl who'd knelt in broken glass, but she remembered the lesson that came after. You don't stay down just because someone pushes you there. Winter came back hard, and with it came a different kind of challenge. A trapper named Marcus showed up at the cabin with a gunshot wound in his side and 3 other trappers who looked ready to kill anyone who moved wrong. They kicked the door open without knocking, dragged Marcus to the table, and one of them, a huge man with a scar bisecting his face, pointed a rifle at Lydia. Fix him, Scarface said. Lydia looked at Elias. He was already positioning himself near his own rifle, face unreadable. Put the gun down, Lydia said, surprised by how steady her voice was. Fix him first. I can't work with a gun pointed at my head. You'll work however I tell you to. Elias's rifle was suddenly pointed at Scarface's head. She said, put it down. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. The cabin filled with the kind of silence that came right before violence. Then Scarface lowered his rifle. Just fix him, please. The please sounded like it hurt him to say. Lydia moved to the table where Marcus was bleeding through a bandage someone had tied around his middle. She peeled it back and saw the problem immediately. The bullet was still in there, lodged near his spine. This is bad, she said. Can you fix it? I don't know. The bullet's deep. If I go digging for it, I might hit something that kills him. If I leave it in, infection will kill him anyway. So what do you do? One of the other trappers asked. Lydia thought about the girl who'd died from poison. Thought about Thomas with the infected hand. Thought about every patient she'd lost because she'd been too scared to try something difficult. I try, she said finally. Elias, I need whiskey, clean cloth, and something to bite down on. What followed was the worst hour of Lydia's life. Marcus screamed so loud she thought he'd shatter his own teeth. Blood poured out faster than she could clean it. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the metal probe she was using to find the bullet. But she didn't stop. She found the bullet wedged against a rib, worked it loose with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, and pulled it out along with fragments of cloth that had been driven into the wound. Marcus passed out from pain halfway through. Lydia cleaned the wound, packed it with herbs, and stitched him up with thread that kept slipping in her bloody fingers. When she finished, she stepped back and nearly collapsed. Elias caught her. You did good. He's going to die anyway, Lydia whispered. That wound's too deep. Infection will... Maybe, Elias said, but you gave him a chance he didn't have an hour ago. Marcus didn't die. He developed a fever that nearly killed him, but Lydia fought it with everything she had. Changed his bandages every few hours. Forced water and medicine down his throat when he was delirious. Sat up for 3 nights straight monitoring his breathing. On the 4th day, his fever broke. On the 7th day, he sat up and ate solid food. Scarface, whose real name turned out to be Thomas, same as the miner who died, looked at Lydia like she was something holy. You're a miracle worker, he said. I'm just stubborn, Lydia corrected. There's a difference. When they left a week later, Marcus walked out on his own power. The trappers left payment, furs, ammunition, dried meat, and a gold pocket watch that Thomas said had belonged to his father. This is too much, Lydia tried to say. It's not enough, Thomas cut her off. You saved his life. There's no payment that covers that. After they left, Elias examined the furs. These are quality. You could sell them in town for good money. I don't need money. You need supplies, medicine, better tools. The people you're treating need those things. He looked at her seriously. What you're doing here, it's getting bigger. You can't do it all yourself anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying you need help, real help, people who can learn from you, apprentices. The word felt strange, important, like it meant something Lydia wasn't ready for. I don't know how to teach anyone, she said. You learned by doing. They will too. Elias folded the furs carefully. You're good at this, Lydia, better than you know. But there's too many people and only one of you. Either you start training others or you watch people die because you couldn't get to them in time. He was right. He was always right about things like this. But the thought of being responsible for teaching someone else, of having her mistakes become their mistakes, terrified her. The first apprentice arrived in early spring, and she was everything Lydia didn't expect. Her name was Sarah. She was 17, and she showed up at the cabin with a black eye, split lip, and a burn scar on her arm in the shape of a hand. "My father did this," Sarah said without preamble, standing in the doorway like she might run at any second. "I heard there's a woman up here who helps people. I need help." Lydia knew that look. Had worn it herself not that long ago. "Come inside," she said. Sarah's story came out in pieces over the next few days. Father who drank, brothers who were worse, a mother who died and left her alone with men who saw her as property. She'd run when her father tried to marry her off to a man twice her age who already had 2 dead wives. "I don't have anywhere to go," Sarah said, "but I can work. I can learn. I'll do anything." Lydia looked at Elias. He gave the smallest nod. "You can stay," Lydia said, "but it's not easy here. The work's hard. The winters are brutal. And if you're going to learn healing, you need to understand you'll see things that break your heart, and there's nothing you can do about it." "I already know about things that break your heart," Sarah said quietly. So she stayed. Teaching Sarah was harder than anything Lydia had done before. The girl was smart but skittish, flinching at sudden movements and apologizing for everything. She burned food, mixed herbs wrong, and nearly fainted the first time she had to clean an infected wound. But she didn't quit. "Why do you want to learn this?" Lydia asked one night after a particularly difficult day where they'd lost a patient despite doing everything right. Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Because my mother died from something simple. Fever after childbirth. The doctor in town wouldn't come because we couldn't pay. She just died. In pain. Scared." She looked up with fierce eyes. "I don't want anyone else to die like that. Not if I can help it." Lydia recognized that fire. It was the same one that burned inside her. Over the following months, Sarah transformed. Her hands grew steady. Her voice became firmer. She started anticipating what Lydia needed before being asked. And when patients arrived, Sarah treated them with the same fierce determination that had made Lydia's reputation. Then Martha showed up. Martha was 40, had been a midwife down in the valleys until her husband died and his family threw her out. She'd heard about Lydia and came offering her services, decades of experience delivering babies in exchange for a place to live. "I know childbirth," Martha said bluntly. "You know wounds and sickness. Together, we could save more people." Lydia hired her on the spot. Then came David, a failed medical student who'd been expelled for questioning his professors too much. Then Elena, a former slave who'd learned healing from her grandmother. Then 2 more young women running from situations that sounded too much like Sarah's. By the end of the 2nd year, Lydia's isolated cabin had become something else entirely. A school, a refuge, a hospital. "We need more space," Elias said one night, surveying the crowded cabin where people now slept in shifts. "Where would we even build?" "There's a valley about a mile north, protected. Good water source. Enough flat ground for multiple buildings." He looked at her seriously. "If you're going to do this, really do this, you need proper facilities, not just one cabin. That would take money, materials, time we don't have." "The people you've saved have money," Elias pointed out, "and they'd help build if you asked. You've earned that." So they built. Families Lydia had treated came with lumber and labor. Trappers she'd saved brought supplies from town. Even a few of the miners pitched in, grateful for the time she'd set broken bones or treated black lung. Within 6 months, they'd constructed 3 new buildings around the original cabin, one for housing patients, one for storing supplies and preparing medicine, and one for the apprentices to sleep in. What had started as one woman trying to survive had become something that looked almost like hope. But success bred contempt. The first real attack came from a preacher named Whitmore, who showed up with a Bible in one hand and accusations in the other. "You're practicing medicine without authority," he announced to a crowd that had gathered. Patients, apprentices, even some curious travelers. "Teaching young women to reject proper societal roles, playing with forces you don't understand." Lydia stood on the cabin porch, arms crossed. "I'm helping people who need it." "You're encouraging sin," Whitmore corrected. "These girls should be married, having children, not cutting into people and pretending to understand medicine. The girls here are learning skills that save lives. That seems more useful than useful." Whitmore's face went red. "What's useful is women knowing their place. What's useful is people trusting in prayer and proper doctors instead of, he gestured at Lydia with obvious disgust, whatever this is. Sarah, standing behind Lydia, went rigid. Lydia could feel the girl's anger radiating like heat. This, Lydia said carefully, is what happens when proper doctors won't help people who can't pay, when prayers don't set broken bones, when girls who run from abuse need somewhere to go that isn't another form of hell. You're teaching rebellion. I'm teaching survival. Same thing in the eyes of decent people, Whitmore shot back. Mark my words, woman, this ends badly. You're building something unnatural here, something that goes against the order of things, and when it falls apart, and it will, don't expect sympathy from anyone. He left in a cloud of righteous anger, taking several people with him. Lydia stood there shaking, not from fear, but from rage she didn't know she was capable of. Bastard, Sarah muttered. Sarah, he is. He doesn't care about what's right. He just doesn't like that we're doing something without asking permission from men like him. She was right, but admitting it felt dangerous. That night, Elias found Lydia sitting outside, staring at the valley below where lights from their small settlement glowed against the darkness. You're thinking too loud, he said. Whitmore's not wrong about one thing. This is getting bigger than I ever planned. More people depending on us, more attention, more ways it could all fall apart. So what do you want to do? Lydia thought about the girl she'd been in Black Ash Ridge, thought about running, hiding, making herself smaller so nobody noticed her. Then she thought about Sarah, about Martha, about all the apprentices who'd come here looking for the same thing Lydia had once found, a chance to be more than the world said they could be. I want to keep going, she said finally, but I'm scared. Good, Elias said. Fear means you understand what you're risking. People without fear make stupid choices. What if Whitmore's right? What if this does fall apart? Then you'll build it again. That's what you do. He sat down beside her. You've spent 2 years proving everyone wrong about who you are. Don't stop now just because some preacher doesn't like it. It's not just him. There'll be others, people with more power, more influence. Probably, Elias agreed, but you've got something they don't. What's that? People who'd fight for you, because you fought for them first. Lydia looked at the settlement, her settlement, and realized he was right. She wasn't alone anymore. She had apprentices who believed in what they were building, patients who trusted her with their lives, even Elias, who'd given her this chance when nobody else would. I need to go back to Black Ash Ridge, Lydia said suddenly. Elias went very still. Why? Because I left things unsaid with my father. Because I ran instead of facing what that town did to me. Because, she struggled for words, because I can't keep building something new if I'm still carrying all that old poison around. Your father's probably dead by now. Then I'll visit his grave and tell him what I should have said when he was alive. She looked at Elias. I need to do this. I need to see if I'm as strong as I think I am. You are, Elias said with absolute certainty. But go anyway. Some things you need to prove to yourself. They left 2 days later, riding the same route they'd taken 3 years ago, but in reverse. Lydia on a horse she could now control, wearing clothes that actually fit, with hands that were scarred and strong and steady. Black Ash Ridge looked smaller than she remembered, dirtier, meaner, like the whole town had given up on itself and was just waiting to die. Murphy's Saloon was still there, still full of the same type of men drinking the same type of poison. Lydia tied her horse outside and pushed through the doors. The noise died the second they saw her. For a moment nobody spoke. They just stared at this woman who looked familiar but wrong, too strong, too sure of herself, too much like someone who didn't belong in a place like this anymore. Then Wade Hickson, older and meaner and drunk as always, stood up from his table. Well, hell, he slurred. It's the pig girl. Come back to get laughed at some more? Lydia looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just pity for a man so small he had to hurt others to feel big. I came to see my father, she said calmly. Where's his grave? The question landed like a stone. Murphy cleared his throat from behind the bar. He ain't dead. He's at the shack. Been drunk for 3 years straight, but still breathing. Lydia nodded once and turned to leave. That's it? Wade called after her. No crying? No begging? You really think you're better than us now? She stopped at the door and looked back. No, she said. I just know I'm different, and that's enough. Then she walked out, leaving Wade sputtering into his whiskey. Her father's shack looked worse than ever, roof caving in, door hanging crooked, trash piled around it like a moat. Samuel Mercer sat on the porch in the same chair he'd always used, looking like death had started claiming him but couldn't be bothered to finish the job. When he saw Lydia, something flickered in his eyes. "Lydia? It's me. You're—" He struggled for words. "Different." "Yeah." They stared at each other across 3 years of silence and decades of damage. "Why'd you come back?" Samuel asked finally. "To tell you something I should have said a long time ago." Lydia took a breath. "You were a terrible father. You spent my entire life punishing me for existing, making me feel worthless, treating me like I was the reason Mother died." Samuel flinched but didn't argue. "I used to think maybe I deserved it," Lydia continued. "Maybe I really was all the things you called me. But I'm not. I never was. You were just too broken to see it. Your mother—" "I know," Lydia cut him off. "I know I reminded you of her. I know losing her destroyed you. But I lost her too. And I didn't have anyone to help me survive it. You were supposed to be that person. Instead, you became another thing I had to survive." Samuel's hands shook. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good. Because I don't forgive you." Lydia felt tears on her face, but her voice stayed steady. "But I don't hate you either. You're just sad, broken. And I can't fix you the way I fix other people." "I heard stories," Samuel said quietly, "about a woman healer in the mountains. Didn't know it was you." "It is." "You save people?" "I try. That's more than I ever did." He looked at her with eyes that held something that might have been pride if he remembered how that felt. "I'm sorry for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." Lydia stood there, feeling the weight of words she'd waited her entire life to hear, only to discover they didn't fix anything. They were just words. The damage was already done. "I'm leaving," she said. "I probably won't come back. But I wanted you to know. I didn't let what you did to me destroy who I became. That's my revenge. Living despite you." Samuel nodded, and Lydia saw tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. She turned to leave, then stopped. "There's a girl at my settlement," she said without looking back. 17, ran from an abusive father. I'm teaching her to heal people, to be strong, to believe she matters." She finally looked at him. "I'm giving her what you never gave me. And she's going to save more lives than you ever touched. That's your legacy. The good I do in spite of you." Then she left, and this time she didn't look back. Elias was waiting with the horses. He took one look at her face and asked, "You good?" "Getting there," Lydia said. They rode out of Black Ash Ridge with the sun setting behind them, and Lydia felt something release in her chest. Not forgiveness, not closure. Just the simple understanding that some wounds heal and some don't. But you keep living anyway. Halfway home, they found a girl, maybe 16, sitting beside the road with a busted lip and terror in her eyes. "Please," she said when she saw them, "I need help. My uncle, he's been— I can't go back there." Lydia looked at Elias. He nodded. She climbed down from her horse and held out her hand to the girl. "What's your name?" "Rebecca." "Rebecca, my name's Lydia. You're safe now. Can you ride?" The girl nodded. "Good. We've got a long way to go, but there's a place in the mountains where girls like you can learn to be more than the world tells them they can be. You interested?" Rebecca took her hand. They rode through the night, 3 people now instead of 2, heading toward a settlement that kept growing whether Lydia was ready for it or not. Behind them, Black Ash Ridge disappeared into darkness. Ahead, the mountains rose up like teeth against the stars, dangerous, difficult, and full of people learning to survive by refusing to quit. Lydia smiled. She was finally home. Rebecca turned out to be a fighter, which was good because the settlement needed fighters more than it needed gentle souls. By the time they returned from Black Ash Ridge, word had spread about what Lydia was building in the mountains. Not just a healing station anymore, something bigger. A place where women nobody wanted could learn to be indispensable. Where the broken could become healers. Where running away looked less like cowardice and more like the smartest decision a person could make. Girls kept arriving. Some with stories like Sarah's and Rebecca's, violence written on their skin in bruises and scars. Others came because they'd heard whispers in towns and trading posts about a woman who'd rejected everything civilized society demanded and built something new in the wilderness. Within a year, the settlement housed 23 people, mostly women, though a few men showed up too, outcasts, former slaves, a deaf boy whose family had abandoned him, an old Chinese miner who knew more about herbal medicine than Lydia had learned in 3 years. They called the place Mercy Ridge, though nobody remembered who'd named it first. Lydia hated the name, too soft, too religious sounding, but it stuck anyway. What she couldn't hate was what they'd built. 6 buildings now, including a proper surgery room, with tools she'd traded furs and saved lives to acquire. A garden that produced medicinal herbs year-round. A library of sorts, journals and books donated or stolen or copied by hand, all documenting treatments that worked and ones that killed people. Martha ran the midwifery side, delivering babies with the kind of competence that came from 30 years of practice. Sarah had become Lydia's right hand, able to handle anything short of major surgery without supervision. David taught anatomy using diagrams he drew himself and whatever bodies they could study, mostly animals, sometimes humans who donated themselves to learning before dying. It should have been enough. It wasn't. The 4th year brought Dr. Harrison Blackwell, and with him came the kind of trouble that couldn't be fixed with herbs and stitches. He arrived on a cold October morning with 2 armed men and an expression that said he'd already decided everyone at Mercy Ridge was guilty of something. He was maybe 50, well-dressed in a way that screamed money and education, with a face that had probably been handsome before arrogance ruined it. Lydia met him in the main yard, wiping blood off her hands from a surgery she'd just finished. A trapper had come in with a leg crushed by a falling tree. She'd amputated below the knee, and he'd survive if infection didn't kill him first. Dr. Blackwell, she said, recognizing him from descriptions. He ran the largest medical practice in Copper Falls, 3 territories over. What brings you up here? Concern, Blackwell said, in a voice like silk hiding knives. I've been hearing disturbing reports about unlicensed medical practices in these mountains. Wondered if the rumors were true. Depends on the rumors. That a woman with no formal training is performing surgeries, prescribing medicines, teaching others to do the same. His eyes swept the settlement with obvious distaste, essentially playing doctor with people's lives. I don't play, Lydia said flatly. I work. People come here dying. They usually leave alive. That's not playing. That's results. Results without understanding the science behind them are just dangerous luck. Blackwell stepped closer, his guards flanking him. Do you have any idea how many ways you could kill someone by accident? How many medications interact badly? How many procedures require knowledge of anatomy you couldn't possibly possess? I possess what I've learned by doing, which is more than some doctors learn from books. That's exactly the kind of arrogance that gets people killed. Sarah appeared beside Lydia, her jaw set. The people here are alive because of her. How many can your fancy practice say that about? Blackwell's face went cold. Young lady, I've saved more lives than you've seen patients. The difference is I did it properly. With education. With authority granted by medical institutions that understand the gravity of this work. Authority that costs money most people don't have, Martha said, joining them. She looked Blackwell up and down like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. You treat the rich and well-connected. We treat everyone else. Seems like there's room for both. There's no room for dangerous incompetence masquerading as medicine, Blackwell shot back. I could shut this operation down tomorrow. Have you arrested for practicing without a license? On what authority? Elias's voice came from behind them. He'd been working on the new storage building, but now stood with his rifle visible, face carved from stone. Last I checked, Mountain Territory doesn't fall under Copper Falls jurisdiction. Medical malpractice crosses all jurisdictions. So does shooting trespassers, Elias said mildly. And you're currently trespassing, so maybe state your actual business or get gone. Blackwell's guards shifted nervously. Everyone in 3 territories knew Elias Boone's reputation, and nobody wanted to test whether the stories were true. I'm here to observe, Blackwell said, adjusting his coat with forced dignity. If this establishment is truly helping people, I'll report that. If I find evidence of harm being done, I'll make sure appropriate authorities are notified. Fine, Lydia said before Elias could escalate. Observe. We've got nothing to hide. What followed was 3 days of the most excruciating scrutiny Lydia had ever endured. Blackwell watched everything with narrowed eyes and a small notebook, writing observations that probably read like an indictment. He questioned her methods, criticized her tools, sneered at her use of folk remedies that had no basis in real medicine. When Lydia said a broken arm, Blackwell pointed out she'd done it wrong, even though the patient reported no pain and the bone aligned perfectly. When Sarah treated an infection with a poultice, Blackwell lectured about proper antibacterial procedures while ignoring that the infection cleared up in 2 days. The worst came on the 3rd day when a miner arrived having been stabbed in a bar fight. The blade had gone deep into his abdomen and he was bleeding out fast. "This requires a hospital," Blackwell announced. "He needs surgery by a qualified surgeon." "Nearest hospital is 2 days' ride," Lydia said, already prepping her tools. "He'll be dead in 2 hours. I'm doing it here." "You'll kill him." "I'll give him a chance. That's more than he has otherwise." She operated while Blackwell watched, his disapproval so thick it was almost physical. The surgery was brutal. The blade had nicked the intestine, and Lydia had to repair it with stitches so precise her hands cramped. Blood soaked through her apron. The miner screamed until David gave him whiskey and something to bite down on. 2 hours later, the miner was stitched up and alive. Blackwell said nothing, but Lydia saw him write several pages in his notebook. That night, Elias found Lydia sitting outside the surgery building, hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. "He's going to use that surgery against you," Elias said. "I know." "Could claim you practiced beyond your abilities. Put the patient at unnecessary risk." "The patient is alive. That should count for something." "Should" and "does" are different things. Elias sat down beside her. "Men like Blackwell don't care about results. They care about control, about making sure people like you know your place." "What's my place supposed to be?" "Dead in Black Ash Ridge, or married to some bastard who treats you like livestock. Definitely not running a medical settlement that's better than his expensive practice." Lydia laughed, though it came out bitter. "You think that's what this is about? Jealousy?" "Partially, but mostly it's about power. You're proof that his education and authority don't matter as much as he needs them to. That scares him more than you failing ever could." "So what do I do?" "Keep working, keep saving lives. And when he comes back with his report, we deal with it then." Blackwell left the next morning without saying goodbye. He took his guards and his notebook full of accusations and rode back toward Copper Falls like a man who'd found exactly what he was looking for. 2 weeks later, a territorial marshal arrived with a warrant. The marshal's name was Coleman, and he looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. He was maybe 35, wearing a badge that had seen better days, riding a horse that looked tired of life. "Miss Mercer," he said, dismounting slowly, "I've got a warrant here. Complaints about unlicensed medical practice. Multiple counts of endangering patients through negligent treatment." Lydia's stomach dropped. "Who filed the complaints?" "Dr. Harrison Blackwell, along with supporting testimony from several other physicians who claim you're a danger to public health." Coleman pulled out a document that looked official and threatening. "Says here you need to cease all medical activities immediately. Anyone currently under your care needs to be transferred to qualified physicians." "That's a death sentence," Martha said, appearing beside Lydia with several other apprentices. "Half our patients can't afford qualified physicians. The other half won't survive transport." "I'm just delivering the warrant, ma'am. What you do with it is between you and the territorial court." "And if we ignore it?" Elias asked, also appearing with his rifle. Coleman looked at the rifle, then at Elias, then sighed. "Then I'm supposed to shut this place down by force. But between you and me, I'd really rather not die today trying to arrest a bunch of women for helping people." "Smart man," Elias said. "Is there anyone currently in critical condition?" Coleman asked Lydia. She thought about the trapper still recovering from amputation, the woman who'd given birth 3 days ago and developed complications, the child with pneumonia they were monitoring hourly. "Yes," she said, "several." "Then you've got 2 weeks," Coleman said quietly. "That's how long it'll take me to file my report and wait for further instructions. Use that time to stabilize who you can and figure out your next move." "That's generous," Lydia said carefully. "That's realistic. I've seen what happens when settlements like this get shut down. People die, usually the ones who can't defend themselves." He tipped his hat. 2 weeks. Then I have to come back with a real answer. After Coleman left, the settlement exploded into panicked discussion. They can't shut us down, Sarah said, her voice shaking. We're saving lives. They don't care about that, David countered. They care about authority, about making sure medicine stays in the hands of people who went to the right schools. So what do we do? Rebecca asked. Just stop? Let people die because some rich doctor got his feelings hurt? Everyone looked at Lydia. She thought about the girl in Black Ash Ridge who'd knelt in broken glass. Thought about running, giving up, accepting that some fights couldn't be won. Then she thought about every patient she'd saved, every apprentice who'd found purpose here, every life that existed because she'd refused to stay down when the world pushed her. We fight, she said. Fight how? Martha asked. We're not lawyers. We don't have money for legal battles. No, but we have something better. We have patients who are alive because of what we do here. We have families who'd be burying children if not for our work. We have proof that what we're doing works. Lydia stood up straighter. Blackwell filed his report. Fine. We'll file ours. With every name of every person we've saved, every treatment that worked, every life that proves we're not dangerous, we're necessary. And if they ignore it, David asked, then we make enough noise they can't ignore it. We go to every town, every settlement, every family we've ever helped, and we tell them what's happening. We make this about more than just us. We make it about whether poor people deserve to live. Elias smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You're learning. The next 2 weeks turned into a war fought with words and witnesses instead of bullets. Sarah and Rebecca rode to settlements they'd visited before, gathering statements from people Lydia had treated. Martha contacted every family whose babies she'd delivered, asking them to write letters supporting Mercy Ridge. David compiled their medical records, hundreds of patients, thousands of successful treatments, proof written in survival. Lydia herself went to speak with the families living closest to their territory. She stood in their homes and trading posts and told them the truth. Mercy Ridge was being shut down because it worked too well, because it helped people who couldn't pay, because it proved that medicine didn't belong exclusively to the rich and educated. The response shocked her. People were angry, not at Lydia, at Blackwell, and the territorial authorities trying to silence her. Miners organized petitions. Trappers spread the word across 3 territories. Even some of the wealthier families whose children Lydia had saved offered money for legal defense. We're building something, Martha said one night, looking at the stack of letters and statements they'd collected. Not just a case, a movement. Movements get crushed, Lydia said quietly. You know that. So do people who fight alone. But this isn't just you anymore. It's everyone who needs what you built here. Lydia looked at the letters, each one a story of survival that wouldn't have happened without Mercy Ridge. Each one proof that what they were doing mattered more than credentials or authority or the approval of men like Blackwell. When Marshal Coleman returned exactly 2 weeks later, he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 4 territorial officials, 3 of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The 4th was a severe woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Judge Patricia Thornton. I've reviewed the case, Thornton said without preamble. Dr. Blackwell's complaints and your counter-documentation. Both sides present compelling arguments. With respect, Judge, Lydia said, this isn't about arguments. It's about whether people too poor for real doctors deserve to die. Don't presume to tell me what this case is about, young lady. I've been practicing law since before you were born. Then you know that law without mercy is just cruelty with official approval. Thornton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. You have strong opinions for someone accused of dangerous medical practices. I have results. People who'd be dead are alive. That's not opinion. That's fact. Facts without proper training are accidents waiting to happen. And proper training without compassion is just expensive indifference. They stared at each other across the yard while the settlement held its collective breath. Finally, Thornton spoke. I'm not shutting you down. Yet. The settlement exhaled. But, Thornton continued sharply, you will submit to regular inspections. You will maintain detailed records of all treatments and outcomes. You will not perform any procedure you are not qualified for. And if I receive credible reports of negligence or malpractice, I will shut this operation down so fast your head will spin. Understood? What qualifies as qualified for? Lydia asked carefully. Whatever keeps people alive without killing them through incompetence. Use your judgment. If you're not sure you can do something safely, don't do it. Thornton pulled out a document. This is a provisional operating agreement. It allows you to continue providing medical services under territorial oversight. Sign it or close down. Choose now. Lydia read the document quickly. It was full of restrictions and requirements, but at its core, it gave Mercy Ridge legal protection to keep operating. She signed it. One more thing, Thornton said as she prepared to leave. Dr. Blackwell is well-connected and extremely angry you weren't shut down. He will be watching for any excuse to come after you again. Don't give him one. After Thornton and her officials left, the settlement erupted in celebration. Sarah hugged Lydia so hard her ribs creaked. Martha cried. Even Elias smiled, which was about as demonstrative as he got. But Lydia felt hollow. We didn't win, she told Elias later that night. We just survived long enough to fight another day. That's what winning looks like most of the time, Elias said. You keep surviving, keep fighting. Eventually the bastards trying to crush you get tired or die. That's victory. What if I make a mistake? Kill someone through ignorance? Give Blackwell the excuse he needs? You'll make mistakes. Everyone does. Question is whether you learn from them or let them destroy you. Lydia thought about the patients she'd lost over the years. Thought about the girl who'd died from poison. The miner with the infected hand. All the people she'd tried and failed to save. I carry them with me, she said quietly. Every single one. Some days the weight is so heavy, I don't know how to keep moving. But you do keep moving, Elias pointed out. That's what matters, not that it's easy, that you do it anyway. The next morning brought news that shifted everything sideways. A young man rode up to Mercy Ridge on a lathered horse, barely able to speak from exhaustion. You're the healer? He gasped at Lydia. I am. My sister, she's giving birth. Something's wrong. The baby won't come and she's bleeding and the midwife ran away and... Where? Lydia cut him off. 3 hours south, small homestead near Copper Creek. Copper Creek was in Dr. Blackwell's territory. That's a long ride, Martha said carefully, appearing beside them. Especially into hostile ground. I don't care whose ground it is, Lydia said, already moving toward her medical supplies. There's a woman dying and I can help. Sarah, get my emergency kit. Martha, prep additional supplies in case we need to operate on site. Lydia, Elias said quietly, this could be a trap. She stopped, looked at him, saw the genuine concern in his scarred face. Could be, she agreed, but if it's real and we don't go, a woman and her baby die. I can live with Blackwell hating me. I can't live with that. Then we go careful, Elias said, grabbing his rifle. And if it is a trap, we make sure they regret it. They rode hard, Lydia and Elias and Sarah following the young man whose name turned out to be Thomas. The homestead was isolated, barely more than a shack, surrounded by fields that looked like they'd given up on producing anything useful. Inside, a woman, maybe 20, lay on a bed soaked with blood. Her eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. An older woman who must have been her mother sat beside her, looking helpless. Thank you, the mother breathed when she saw Lydia. Thank you for coming. Lydia examined the woman quickly, and her stomach dropped. The baby was breech and stuck. The mother had been bleeding for hours. This was exactly the kind of situation that killed people even with proper medical facilities. I need space to work, Lydia said. Sarah, set up our equipment. Everyone else out except people I ask for. What followed was 4 hours of the most difficult work Lydia had ever done. The baby wouldn't turn. Lydia tried every technique she knew, hands slick with blood, the mother screaming until her voice broke. Finally, she managed to shift the baby enough to pull it out, a process that tore tissue and caused bleeding that wouldn't stop easily. The baby was blue and silent. Lydia cleared its airway, rubbed its chest, breathed air into tiny lungs that didn't want to work. Behind her, the mother was still bleeding badly, and Sarah was trying to pack the wound with shaking hands. The baby gasped, cried, lived. Lydia handed the infant to Thomas and turned back to his sister, who was fading fast from blood loss. She packed the wound, applied pressure, used every technique she knew to slow the bleeding while Sarah prepared stitches. It took another 2 hours to stabilize the mother. When Lydia finally stepped outside, the sun was setting and her entire body shook from exhaustion. Both alive? Elias asked. Both alive, Lydia confirmed. You look like hell. Feel worse. The family tried to pay her with the last of their money. Lydia refused. They insisted. She refused harder. "Just tell people what happened here," she said. "That's payment enough." They stayed the night to monitor the mother and baby. Both survived the critical first hours. In the morning, when Lydia and the others prepared to leave, Thomas grabbed her hand. "You saved my sister's life. My niece's life. I don't know how to thank you for that." "Stay alive," Lydia said simply. "Both of them. That's thanks enough." They rode back to Mercy Ridge exhausted but satisfied. 2 days later, Dr. Blackwell showed up at the settlement with Marshal Coleman and 4 armed deputies. "You violated the territorial agreement," Blackwell announced, his face flushed with triumph. "You performed a high-risk medical procedure outside approved facilities. That voids your operating license." Lydia's blood ran cold. "A woman was dying. Her baby was dying. I saved both of them. You endangered both of them by attempting a procedure you're not qualified to perform. The provisional agreement specifically stated you wouldn't exceed your abilities." "I didn't exceed anything. I did what needed to be done." "According to whose judgment? Yours? An uneducated woman playing doctor?" Blackwell turned to Coleman. "Marshal, you have your orders. Shut this facility down immediately." Coleman looked deeply uncomfortable. "Dr. Blackwell, the mother and child survived. That has to count for—" "It counts for nothing," Blackwell shouted. "Success through luck is not the same as competent medical practice. This woman is a menace, and I will not allow her to continue putting lives at risk." "Even lives you wouldn't save?" Lydia shot back. "That family couldn't afford you. They came to me because I was their only option. Would you rather they both died following proper procedure? I'd rather people understood that medicine requires education, training, and adherence to professional standards, not wild gambling with people's lives." "The only gambling happening here is you betting I'd fail so you could shut us down," Lydia said, rage making her reckless. "You don't care about that mother. You don't care about medical standards. You care that people are choosing me over you, that they'd rather have a healer who gives a damn than a doctor with expensive credentials and no compassion." Blackwell's face went purple. "You arrogant—" "Enough," Coleman said tiredly. "Dr. Blackwell, I need to consult with Judge Thornton before taking any action. Miss Mercer, you're confined to this settlement until we receive guidance. No more outside calls, no more procedures. You understand?" Lydia understood. She was trapped. The settlement held its breath for 3 days while Coleman rode to consult Thornton. During that time, 5 people arrived needing medical help. Lydia had to turn them all away. One was a child with a broken leg. One was a trapper with pneumonia. One was a woman who'd been beaten badly by her husband. Watching them leave, watching them ride away to suffer or die somewhere else, felt like being cut open with a dull blade. "This is what he wants," Martha said, watching Lydia pace like a caged animal. "He wants you to break, to violate the order so he can shut us down permanently. People are suffering, and you can't help them if you're closed down. Think long term." But long term felt impossible when people were hurting right now. On the 4th day, Marshal Coleman returned. With him rode Judge Thornton. She looked even more severe than before, her face carved from granite and about as forgiving. "I've reviewed the incident," Thornton said without preamble. "Spoken to the family, consulted with medical professionals in 3 territories, and I've reached a decision." The settlement held its breath. "You're not shut down," Thornton said, "but you're not vindicated either. The situation is complicated. The family confirms you saved lives that would have been lost otherwise. But Dr. Blackwell is correct that you took significant risks performing that procedure." "With respect, I'm not finished," Thornton cut Lydia off. "Going forward, you will maintain a detailed log of every procedure you perform. High-risk cases will be reviewed by a medical board I'm establishing. 3 physicians, including Dr. Blackwell, who will assess whether your actions were appropriate. If they find evidence of reckless endangerment, this facility closes. Permanently. Those are the terms. Accept them or shut down now." It was a trap dressed as a compromise. Having Blackwell review her cases meant he'd find fault with everything she did, giving him ammunition to shut Mercy Ridge down piece by piece, but refusing meant closing immediately. "I accept," Lydia said, because she had no choice. After Thornton left, Elias found Lydia standing alone in the yard, staring at nothing. "He's going to destroy us slowly," she said. Pick apart every decision until he finds enough evidence to close us down. Probably, Elias agreed. So what do I do? What you always do. Work. Save lives. Document everything so thoroughly he can't find legitimate fault. And when he comes after you anyway, you fight back harder. I'm tired of fighting. I know. Elias put a hand on her shoulder. But the people who need you don't have the luxury of your tiredness. So you rest when you can, fight when you must. And you keep going until you can't anymore. Lydia leaned into his strength, taking comfort from the solid presence of the man who'd given her this chance years ago. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for seeing something in me I didn't see, for not giving up even when I wanted to. You're worth the trouble, Elias said simply. Always have been. That night, Lydia pulled out her mother's journal and began the most detailed medical log she'd ever created. Every patient, every symptom, every treatment choice and the reasoning behind it, every outcome, good and bad. If Blackwell wanted evidence, she'd give him evidence of lives saved, of techniques that worked, of a settlement that had become necessary to people who'd been abandoned by civilized medicine. She wrote until her hand cramped and her vision blurred. Then she kept writing, because that's what you did when quitting wasn't an option. You kept moving forward until the world gave up trying to stop you, or until you collapsed trying. Either way, you didn't stay down. Not anymore. The detailed logs became Lydia's obsession and her burden. Every morning she woke before dawn to record the previous day's cases while details were still fresh. Every evening she reviewed what her apprentices had documented, checking for gaps that Blackwell could exploit. The work never stopped, treating patients, teaching apprentices, maintaining equipment, and now documenting everything in excruciating detail. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, developed a cough that wouldn't quit. Her hands, already scarred from years of work, started cramping so badly she sometimes couldn't hold a needle steady. You're killing yourself, Martha said one morning, finding Lydia asleep at the table with her face pressed against an open journal. I'm protecting us, Lydia mumbled without lifting her head. By working yourself to death? That's not protection, that's just slower suicide. Blackwell reviews our cases every month. If I miss anything, then he finds fault anyway, Martha interrupted. You could document every breath you take and he'd still claim you're breathing wrong. This isn't about evidence, it's about him wanting you gone. Lydia finally looked up, and Martha flinched at what she saw in her face. Exhaustion so deep it looked like illness. Determination that had curdled into something desperate. I know, Lydia said quietly. But what else can I do? Stop working? Let people die? Close down everything we've built? You could ask for help. You've got 20 people here who'd share the load if you'd let them. I can't risk their documentation being wrong. If Blackwell finds one mistake, then he finds one mistake in something they did, not you. Lydia, you taught these people everything they know. Trust them to do it right. It was the hardest thing Lydia had done in years. Harder than any surgery. Harder than facing her father. But she started delegating the documentation work to Sarah, David, and 3 others she trusted. It helped. Marginally. But it didn't change the fundamental problem. Blackwell was systematically building a case to destroy them, and Lydia was running out of ways to stop him. The breaking point came in the 6th year, during a winter so brutal it killed livestock and froze wells solid. A family of miners showed up at Mercy Ridge half dead from exposure and starvation. The father had black lungs so advanced he could barely breathe. The mother had pneumonia. 3 children, all under 10, were malnourished and sick with various infections. Lydia and her team worked for 3 days straight to save them. They saved 4 out of 5. The youngest child, a girl maybe 6 years old, died on the 3rd night despite everything they tried. Her lungs had been too damaged by exposure, her body too weakened by starvation. She just stopped breathing sometime around midnight, and nothing Lydia did could start it again. The mother's screaming brought the entire settlement running. Lydia stood there covered in the child's blood, holding a small body that had already gone cold, and felt something crack inside her. She walked outside into the snow and didn't stop walking until Elias caught up with her half a mile from the settlement. Come back inside, he said gently. I killed her. No, you didn't. I gave her the wrong medication, or not enough of it, or I should have tried something else. I should have... Her voice broke. She was 6 years old, Elias. 6. And I couldn't save her? Because she was dying before she got here. You gave her 3 extra days. You made those days comfortable. That's not nothing. It's not enough, Lydia screamed into the wind. It's never enough. We work and document everything and follow every rule, and people still die, and Blackwell still comes after us, and I'm so tired I can't think straight anymore, and I don't know how to keep doing this. She collapsed in the snow, sobbing in a way she hadn't since the early days in Black Ash Ridge. Elias sat down beside her, silent, letting her break because sometimes people needed to break before they could rebuild. When the sobs finally subsided into shaking breaths, he spoke. You remember what I told you that first day? Out here, nobody survives by quitting. I'm not quitting. I'm failing. Same thing if you stop trying. He looked at her seriously. That little girl died. That's terrible. That's going to haunt you. But her 3 siblings are alive because you didn't give up on the family. The parents are alive. That's 4 lives that wouldn't exist without you fighting for them. But she died? Everyone dies, Lydia. Everyone. You can't change that. You can only change how many people get more time before it happens. He pulled her to her feet. Now you can sit here and freeze to death feeling sorry for yourself. Or you can get up and go treat the people who are still alive. Choose fast because I'm not carrying you back. It was the kick in the teeth she needed. Lydia went back. Documented the child's death in painful detail. Wrote down everything she'd tried and why it hadn't worked. Then she went to check on the surviving family members and made sure they didn't join their daughter. 2 weeks later, Blackwell arrived for his monthly review with a smile that said he'd found exactly what he'd been looking for. I've reviewed your recent cases, he said, spreading Lydia's logs across the table like evidence at a trial. And I found several instances of questionable judgment, but this, he tapped the entry about the 6-year-old girl, this is negligent homicide. Lydia's blood went cold. That child was dying before she arrived. I documented the condition she was in. You documented that you gave her medication that was contraindicated for someone her size and condition. You performed procedures that worsened her state. You essentially experimented on a dying child and killed her faster than nature would have. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened according to your own records. Blackwell looked triumphant. I'm recommending immediate closure. This facility is a danger to public health, and this case proves it definitively. 1 child died out of hundreds I've saved. 1 child you killed through incompetence. The others were luck. He stood. Marshal Coleman will be here tomorrow with closure orders. I suggest you begin preparing your apprentices for reassignment or arrest, depending on their complicity in your practices. After Blackwell left, the settlement exploded into chaos. We could run, Sarah suggested desperately. Pack up, move deeper into the mountains where they can't find us. They'd find us, David said, and then we'd be fugitives on top of everything else. We could fight, Rebecca said, and several others nodded. We've got enough people, enough weapons. No, Lydia said firmly. We're not starting a war. People would die, probably us. So we just give up? Sarah's eyes were wet. Let them shut down everything we've built? Lydia looked around at the faces she'd come to know so well over the years. Sarah, who'd arrived beaten and terrified and was now one of the best healers in 3 territories. Rebecca, who'd learned to set bones and deliver babies with hands that used to shake. Martha, who'd become more than a midwife, a teacher, a leader, a friend. David and Elena, and all the others who'd found purpose in this impossible place. No, she said quietly. We don't give up. But we don't fight stupid either. We fight smart. How? Martha asked. We make Blackwell's victory cost him everything. Lydia spent the night writing letters, dozens of them, to every family they'd helped over the years, every town that had sent patients to Mercy Ridge, every territory that had benefited from what they'd built. She didn't ask for help. She just told them the truth. Mercy Ridge was being closed because they'd saved too many poor people, because they'd proven medicine didn't require wealth or formal education, because they were inconvenient to men who wanted medicine to stay exclusive and expensive. Then she wrote one more letter, addressed to every newspaper and territorial government office she could name. She handed the letters to Sarah at dawn. Ride fast, deliver these. Don't come back until they're all sent. What are you going to do? What I should have done years ago, stop defending and start attacking. Marshal Coleman arrived at noon with the closure orders and a very uncomfortable expression. I'm sorry, he said, and sounded like he meant it. Judge Thornton reviewed Blackwell's evidence and agreed. You've got 24 hours to evacuate all patients and cease operations. Can I see the order? Lydia asked calmly. Coleman handed it over. Lydia read it carefully, noting every legal phrase and procedural requirement. This says I have to cease medical operations, she said. It doesn't say I can't teach. Coleman blinked. What? Medical operations are treating patients. Teaching isn't treating patients, it's education. She looked at him seriously. You're shutting down our hospital. Fine. But you can't shut down a school. That would require different jurisdiction entirely. Coleman looked at the order, then at Lydia, then back at the order. That's technically correct. So as of right now, Mercy Ridge Medical Facility is closed, but Mercy Ridge School of Frontier Medicine is open for enrollment. We'll continue teaching our apprentices. We just won't treat patients here. She paused. We'll treat them in their homes, or in temporary field clinics we set up in other territories, places where Blackwell and Thornton don't have jurisdiction. Coleman stared at her. Then he started laughing. Genuine, exhausted laughter. You're going to make this a nightmare for them, aren't you? I'm going to make them regret ever trying to stop us. For what it's worth, I hope you succeed, but I still have to enforce this order. I understand. Give me the 24 hours to evacuate patients safely. They spent those 24 hours transforming everything they'd built. The surgery building became a classroom where apprentices learned anatomy from textbooks and animal specimens. The patient ward became student housing. The medicine preparation room became a laboratory for teaching pharmaceutical techniques. Every patient currently in their care was transferred to field training sites, temporary clinics set up just outside territorial boundaries where apprentices could practice under supervision, which happened to look exactly like treating patients. It was a shell game, and everyone knew it, but it was legal. Blackwell showed up 2 days later, his face purple with rage when he saw what they'd done. This is a violation of the spirit of the closure order, he shouted at Coleman. But not the letter, Coleman pointed out. They're not operating a medical facility anymore. They're running a school that happens to train people in medicine. They're still treating patients in other territories, outside your jurisdiction and mine. If you want to shut down their field operations, take it up with those territorial governments. This is a mockery of justice. This is compliance with a legal order, Coleman corrected. They're following the law exactly as written. If you don't like it, appeal to Judge Thornton for a more comprehensive order. But comprehensive orders took time to write and enforce. And during that time, Lydia's letters were spreading like wildfire. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Families they'd helped began showing up at territorial government offices, demanding to know why the only medical facility that had helped them was being shut down. Newspapers ran stories about the frontier healer being persecuted for saving poor people. Town councils started passing resolutions supporting Mercy Ridge and condemning Blackwell's actions. Within a month, the situation had become a territorial scandal. Within 2 months, it became a political crisis. Judge Thornton called a hearing to address the growing controversy. Both sides were ordered to present their cases publicly, in front of territorial representatives and any citizens who wanted to attend. The courtroom was packed. Lydia sat at one table with Martha and David beside her for support. Blackwell sat at another with 2 other physicians who'd signed supporting statements. Judge Thornton presided with an expression that suggested she deeply regretted every decision that had led to this moment. Blackwell presented first, laying out his case with clinical precision. Lydia was untrained, unqualified, dangerous. Her successful cases were luck. Her failures were proof of incompetence. The child who died was Exhibit A in why untrained people shouldn't practice medicine. He was eloquent and convincing and completely bloodless. Then it was Lydia's turn. She stood up, walked to the front of the room, and looked at the packed gallery of people who'd come to watch. Dr. Blackwell says I'm dangerous, she began quietly. He says I'm untrained and unqualified. He says people die because of my incompetence. She paused. He's partially right. I am untrained by formal standards. I don't have medical certificates or degrees from fancy institutions. People have died under my care. A murmur went through the crowd. But what Dr. Blackwell won't tell you is why those people came to me in the first place. They came because they were too poor for real doctors, because formal medicine wouldn't see them without payment up front, because they were dying and nobody with proper credentials cared enough to help. She pulled out her medical logs. 6 years of documentation, hundreds of cases. These are the people I've treated. Minors with black lung, children with fevers, women dying in childbirth. Every single one documented. Every treatment, every outcome. Yes, I've lost patients, but I've saved 10 times as many, maybe more. And every single person I saved wouldn't be alive if they'd waited for help from someone with Dr. Blackwell's qualifications. Blackwell stood. That's an emotional appeal, not a medical argument. You're right, Lydia agreed, because medicine isn't just science, it's also compassion. It's also giving a damn whether people live or die. It's also being willing to try when failure means watching someone suffer. She turned back to the gallery. Dr. Blackwell wants medicine to stay exclusive, to stay expensive, to stay in the hands of people who can afford education that most of us will never access. I want medicine to be available to everyone who needs it, even if it's imperfect, even if it's taught by people who learned by doing instead of reading, even if it makes qualified physicians uncomfortable that someone without their credentials can save lives just as well as they can. You cannot save lives as well as qualified physicians, Blackwell interjected. That's the entire point. Can't I? Lydia pulled out a separate document. This is a list of patients we've both treated for similar conditions over the past 3 years. My survival rate is higher than yours. The courtroom erupted. Blackwell's face went white. That's impossible. Your methods work, Lydia finished. Maybe not how you do it. Maybe not following procedures you learned in medical school, but they work. People live. That should be what matters. Thornton banged her gavel, restoring order. Miss Mercer, you're making serious accusations about a licensed physician's competence. I'm presenting facts. Dr. Blackwell came after me claiming I endangered patients. I'm showing that his expensive, credentialed medicine doesn't save people any better than my untrained efforts. Sometimes it saves them worse. This is outrageous, Blackwell sputtered. I treat far more complex cases. Do you? Lydia challenged. Or do you just charge more for them? Because according to my records, we're seeing the same injuries, the same infections, the same complications. The difference is, I treat everyone who shows up. You treat everyone who can pay. The gallery was riveted now, watching this confrontation like it was theater. Thornton looked between them with an expression of deep weariness. Both of you sit down. I've heard enough. They sat. Thornton was quiet for a long moment, studying her notes and the documents both sides had presented. Finally, she spoke. This case represents a fundamental question about the nature of medical practice in frontier territories. On one hand, we have established medical professionals with formal training and legal authority. On the other, we have practitioners who learned through experience and necessity, treating patients who couldn't access formal medicine. She looked directly at Lydia. Miss Mercer, your work has saved lives. That's undeniable. But it's also true that you lack formal training and have made decisions that qualified physicians question. Lydia's heart sank. However, Thornton continued, Dr. Blackwell, your campaign to shut down Mercy Ridge appears motivated less by genuine concern for patient safety and more by professional jealousy. Your own treatment outcomes don't support claims of superior competence, and your unwillingness to serve poor patients undermines your argument about protecting public health. Blackwell started to protest, but Thornton silenced him with a look. My ruling is as follows. Mercy Ridge may continue operating as both a school and a medical facility, provided all practitioners maintain detailed treatment logs subject to quarterly review by a panel of physicians that does not include Dr. Blackwell. High-risk procedures must be documented with particular care, and any pattern of negligence will result in immediate closure. She looked at Lydia. You've proven you can save lives. Now prove you can do it responsibly. The gallery erupted in applause. Lydia sat there stunned, barely processing what had just happened. They'd won. Not completely. The restrictions were real, and the oversight would be burdensome. But they'd won the right to keep existing. Blackwell stormed out without a word, his two supporting physicians trailing behind him. After the courtroom cleared, Martha hugged Lydia so hard she couldn't breathe. You did it! You actually did it! We did it, Lydia corrected. All of us. But the victory felt hollow somehow, like she'd won a battle but the war was far from over. That night, back at Mercy Ridge, Elias found her sitting outside staring at the mountains. You should be celebrating, he said. I'm too tired to celebrate. Then rest. You earned it. Lydia looked at him, really looked at him, and noticed for the first time how much he'd aged. His hair had gone mostly gray. New scars crossed old ones on his face and hands. He moved slower than he used to, like something hurt that he wasn't mentioning. Are you all right? She asked. Fine. Elias, he sighed. Just getting old. Happens to everyone. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Over the next months, Elias's health deteriorated in ways that scared Lydia more than any legal threat. He developed a cough that sounded like his lungs were tearing themselves apart, lost weight despite eating normally, started getting winded from work that used to be easy. Lydia examined him and found exactly what she'd feared. His lungs were scarred and damaged, probably from years of breathing smoke and cold mountain air and dust from hunting in all weather. Can you fix it? He asked, already knowing the answer from her expression. No. I can make you more comfortable, but I can't fix this. Your lungs are too damaged. How long? I don't know. Months. Maybe a year if we're lucky. Elias nodded like she'd told him the weather forecast. Then we make the most of what's left. He kept working despite Lydia's protests, teaching apprentices how to track game and survive harsh conditions, and all the wilderness skills he'd learned over a lifetime in the mountains. He treated his dying like just another problem to work around instead of something to fear. Lydia watched him fade with a grief so profound she couldn't name it. This man had given her everything, a second chance, a purpose, a home when she'd had nothing. He'd believed in her when nobody else would. He'd taught her that strength wasn't about being unbreakable, but about getting back up every time the world knocked you down. And now she was going to lose him. I don't know how to do this without you, she told him one night when his coughing had subsided enough for conversation. Same way you do everything else, Elias said, his voice rough and weak. You keep going. You take care of the people who need you. You build something that outlasts both of us. That's not enough. It's all anyone gets. We do what we can while we're here. Then we trust the people we taught to keep doing it after we're gone. He died on a clear morning in late spring, with Lydia holding his hand and Sarah crying quietly in the corner. His last words were, "You changed the world, Lydia. Don't you dare stop now." Then he was gone, and Lydia felt like something inside her had been cut away. The settlement shut down for 3 days to mourn. They buried Elias on the ridge overlooking the valley where he'd first brought Lydia all those years ago. Nearly 100 people attended, former patients, apprentices, hunters who'd known him, families he'd helped in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. Lydia stood at his grave and couldn't find words adequate for what he'd meant. So she just said, "Thank you for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I could be more than the world said I was, for giving me the chance to prove them all wrong." Then she walked back to work, because that's what Elias would have wanted. But grief didn't care what Elias would have wanted. It hit Lydia in waves, sudden and devastating and completely disabling. She'd be in the middle of treating a patient and suddenly couldn't remember what she was doing. Would wake up at night reaching for advice Elias could no longer give. Would walk into the cabin and expect to see him there, then remember all over again that he was gone. Sarah found her one night sitting in the dark with Elias's old rifle across her lap, just holding it like it was a piece of him she could keep. "You need to rest," Sarah said gently. "I need to work. You need to grieve." "I don't have time for grief. People need help. The settlement needs running. The quarterly review is coming up, and our logs need to be—" "Other people can handle the logs," Sarah interrupted. "You taught us for a reason. Let us use what you taught us." "What if you make mistakes?" "Then we'll make them and learn from them. The same way you did. The same way Elias taught you to." It was the hardest thing Lydia had ever done, but she stepped back and let her apprentices run Mercy Ridge for a month while she grieved. She spent that month walking the mountains Elias had loved, reading her mother's journal, and slowly coming to terms with the fact that everyone she built her life around eventually left. Her mother had died when she was young. Her father had never really been there to begin with, and now Elias was gone too. But what they'd built together remained. Mercy Ridge wasn't just Lydia anymore. It was Sarah and Martha and David and Rebecca and dozens of others who'd learned to heal, to teach, to fight for people nobody else would fight for. It was bigger than any one person. Maybe that was Elias's real gift, not just believing in Lydia, but teaching her to build something that would survive without him. When Lydia returned to active work after a month, she found the settlement running smoothly. The apprentices had handled everything from complex surgeries to the quarterly review with Thornton's medical panel. They didn't need her the way they used to. That should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt like success. "You did good," Lydia told Sarah, reviewing the month's logs. "We learned from the best," Sarah said simply. And Lydia realized with sudden clarity that this was what legacy looked like. Not one brilliant person doing everything, but that person teaching others until the work continued long after they were gone. She thought about Elias, buried on the ridge, thought about her mother, whose journal still guided her treatments. Both gone, but both still present in everything she did. That had to be enough. That had to be the point. The years after Elias's death moved differently, like time itself had changed its rhythm. Lydia turned 40 without noticing the birthday had passed. Someone, probably Martha, baked a cake anyway, and the settlement celebrated with the kind of forced cheerfulness that came from people who understood grief but didn't know how to fix it. "You're getting old," Martha joked, though she was older herself and starting to show it in the way her hands shook slightly when delivering babies. "We're all getting old," Lydia corrected. "Question is what we do with the time we've got left." What they did was expand. Sarah took a group of apprentices and established a second settlement 2 territories west, in an area where the nearest doctor was 5 days' ride, and people died from things that could be fixed in an afternoon. Rebecca followed a year later, setting up a third clinic in mining country where black lung and cave-ins killed men faster than the mines could replace them. David stayed at Mercy Ridge and formalized the teaching, creating an actual curriculum that students could follow instead of just learning whatever cases happened to come through the door. He recruited former medical students who'd been expelled or quit, people who knew formal medicine but had been rejected by it for being too questioning, too poor, too unconventional. By Lydia's 45th birthday, there were 7 settlements spread across 4 territories, all teaching frontier medicine to people who'd never have accessed it otherwise. But success brought new problems. The medical establishment, already hostile, became openly aggressive. Doctors in major towns began refusing to treat patients who'd been seen at Mercy Ridge facilities, claiming they wouldn't clean up after untrained butchers. Pharmaceutical suppliers started refusing to sell to them. Some territorial governments, influenced by physicians like Blackwell, passed laws restricting who could practice medicine. "They're trying to strangle us economically," David said, reviewing the latest supply rejection. "Can't shut us down legally anymore, so they're making it impossible to operate." "Then we stop depending on their supplies," Lydia said. "We grow our own medicinal plants, make our own tools, find suppliers who don't care about medical politics." "That's going to be expensive." "Everything worth doing is expensive. We'll figure it out." They did, though it took years and creativity that pushed everyone to their limits. They established gardens at every settlement, growing herbs that could be harvested year-round. They recruited blacksmiths to make surgical tools. They found traders willing to smuggle supplies from territories where the medical establishment had less influence. It worked, but barely. And the constant fighting, legal, economic, political, wore everyone down in ways that treating patients never had. Lydia felt it most of all. Her body was betraying her in small ways that added up to something she couldn't ignore anymore. Her hands ached constantly from arthritis. Her vision blurred when reading detailed notes. She got winded climbing hills that used to be easy. "You need to slow down," Martha told her after finding Lydia collapsed in the surgery room, too exhausted to make it back to her bed. "I'll slow down when I'm dead." "At this rate, that's going to be sooner than later." "Then you'll take over. You and Sarah and David. The work continues." "That's not the point," Martha said with frustration that came from years of friendship. "The point is you've spent 20 years burning yourself out for people who can't even thank you properly. When do you get to rest?" "When everyone who needs help gets it. Until then, we keep working." But Martha was right about one thing. Lydia was burning out. She could feel it in the way that used to excite her, now just made her tired. In the way she'd lost patience with apprentices who made mistakes she would have patiently corrected years ago. In the dreams she had about just walking away from all of it and disappearing into the mountains. She was 52 years old, had been doing this work for over 25 years, and she was just so tired. The crisis that changed everything came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. A rider arrived at Mercy Ridge in a panic, saying there was a fever outbreak in a settlement 3 hours south. 20 people sick and getting worse. The local healer had died trying to treat them, and now nobody knew what to do. Lydia was preparing to ride out when her vision blurred so badly she couldn't see. She grabbed the table to steady herself, and suddenly the room was spinning, and her legs weren't working, and she woke up in her own medical facility with Sarah and Martha hovering over her looking terrified. "What happened?" Lydia asked, her mouth dry. "You collapsed," Sarah said. "Your heart was beating irregularly and you weren't breathing right. We thought—" Her voice broke. "We thought we were losing you." "The outbreak. David and Rebecca went. They can handle it." Martha's face was stern. "But you're not going anywhere until we figure out what's wrong with you." What was wrong turned out to be exhaustion so profound her body had simply given up. Her heart was damaged from years of stress. Her lungs showed scarring similar to what had killed Elias. Her joints were deteriorating from decades of hard physical labor. "You need to stop working," Sarah said after examining her thoroughly. "Complete rest for at least 6 months, maybe longer." "That's not possible." "It's necessary. Lydia, you're dying. Not dramatically, but slowly. Your body is shutting down from being overworked for too long." Sarah's eyes were wet. "You taught us to recognize when patients need to stop pushing themselves. Now you need to follow your own advice." The settlements need you alive," Martha interrupted. "Even if you can't work, even if all you can do is teach. But we can't learn from you if you're dead." Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, that she could keep going, that there was too much work left undone. But her body betrayed her by making even sitting up feel impossible. So she rested, and it felt like dying. The first month was the hardest. Lydia lay in bed while the settlement continued without her, feeling useless and forgotten. Apprentices came to visit and update her on cases, but it wasn't the same as doing the work herself. She felt like a relic, something preserved but no longer functional. "This is what it feels like to be finished," she told Martha one night. "You're not finished, you're recovering." "What's the difference?" "One is temporary, the other is permanent. Choose which one you want this to be." Lydia chose recovery, though it took everything she had. She started walking short distances, then longer ones. She worked with her hands doing small tasks that didn't require strength, writing, organizing medical notes, teaching apprentices about diagnosis from her bed. And slowly, over months that felt like years, she regained enough strength to function again. But she wasn't the same person who'd collapsed. Couldn't be. Her body wouldn't allow it. On her 53rd birthday, Lydia called a meeting of everyone who'd ever trained at Mercy Ridge and could make the journey. They came from all 7 settlements, nearly 60 people total, cramming into the main building at the original site. "I'm stepping back," Lydia announced without preamble. "Not completely, but from day-to-day operations. My body can't handle the work anymore, and pretending otherwise just puts patients at risk." The room erupted in protests. "Listen," Lydia cut through them. "I've spent 26 years building this from nothing, but it was never supposed to be about me. It was supposed to be about creating something that survives beyond any one person. That means letting go while I'm still alive to see it continue." "Who takes over?" someone asked. "All of you. This isn't one person's work anymore. It's a network." Sarah runs the Western settlements. Rebecca handles the mining territories. David manages education and training here. Martha continues midwifery and teaches others. Everyone else fills in where they're needed. "And you?" Sarah asked quietly. "I advise. I teach when I can. I document what we've learned so future generations don't have to reinvent everything from scratch. But I'm not the one doing the work anymore. You are." It should have felt like defeat. Instead, it felt like freedom. Lydia spent the next years doing exactly what she'd promised: teaching, documenting, advising when asked. She compiled 26 years of medical knowledge into journals that became textbooks for frontier medicine. She trained the trainers, teaching experienced healers how to pass their knowledge on more effectively. She watched the network grow beyond anything she'd imagined. By her 60th birthday, there were 43 settlements using methods developed at Mercy Ridge. Hundreds of healers who traced their training back to her original apprentices. Thousands of lives saved that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Even formal medicine was beginning to change. Medical schools in major cities started incorporating some of Mercy Ridge's techniques into their curricula, though they rarely acknowledged where the knowledge came from. Doctors who'd once called Lydia a dangerous fraud now used treatments she'd pioneered, just with fancier names. They stole your work and called it theirs, Martha said with disgust, reading an article about innovative frontier medical practices that didn't mention Mercy Ridge once. Good, Lydia said. Means it works well enough that they can't ignore it anymore. I don't care who gets credit as long as people survive. But privately, in moments alone, Lydia wondered what her legacy would actually be. Would anyone remember the fat girl from Black Ash Ridge who'd been laughed out of a saloon? Or would her work just be absorbed into history without her name attached? Then something unexpected happened. A young woman arrived at Mercy Ridge, maybe 19, with a black eye and determination that reminded Lydia painfully of Sarah all those years ago. "My name's Charlotte," she said. "I came because I heard there's a place here where women like me can learn to be more than the world says we are. Is that true?" Lydia looked at her, at this girl who could have been her 26 years ago, running from something terrible toward something uncertain, and felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. "Yes," she said. "That's true." "Come inside." Charlotte stayed, learned, grew strong the way they all had, and watching her transform reminded Lydia why any of this had mattered in the first place. It wasn't about recognition or credit or defeating enemies like Blackwell. It was about giving people chances they wouldn't have had otherwise, about proving that worthlessness was a lie sold by people who needed others to feel small, about building something that said no one was too broken or too poor or too unwanted to matter. That legacy couldn't be stolen or erased because it lived in every person who'd found purpose at Mercy Ridge. The end came quietly, without drama or warning. Lydia was 71 years old, sitting on the porch of the original cabin watching apprentices practice setting broken bones on medical dummies. The mountains rose up around them like old friends, snow-capped and eternal. Sarah sat beside her, gray-haired now, and running the entire Western network. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Everything you gave up for this?" "What did I give up?" "Normal life. Marriage, children, comfort, recognition." Lydia thought about it seriously. "I gave up being invisible, being worthless, being the person Black Ash Ridge said I had to be. Everything else," she gestured at the settlement. "This is what I got instead. Seems like a fair trade." "You changed a lot of lives." "No, I gave people tools to change their own lives. There's a difference." "Still, you should be proud." Lydia looked at the apprentices, Charlotte among them, already showing talent that would take her far. "I'm not proud. Pride means thinking you did something special. I just did what needed doing because nobody else would. That's not special, that's just refusing to quit." That night, Lydia went to sleep in the loft of the cabin where she'd lived for over 2 decades. She dreamed about Elias, about her mother, about the girl she'd been in Black Ash Ridge kneeling in broken glass. In the dream, she helped that girl stand up, wiped the blood off her hands, told her everything would be okay eventually, even though it would be hard first. The girl asked if it was worth it. Lydia told her yes. She didn't wake up. They found her in the morning, peaceful, like she'd just decided she was finished and her body had agreed. The funeral brought hundreds of people, former patients, students of students, families who existed because Lydia had refused to let their ancestors die. They came from territories she'd never visited, carrying stories she'd never heard about people she'd saved indirectly through apprentices who'd learned from her methods. They buried her beside Elias on the ridge overlooking the valley, just like she'd requested years before. Sarah spoke at the funeral, her voice breaking. Lydia used to say she wasn't special, that she just did what needed doing, but that's exactly what made her special. She saw people nobody else would see. She fought for people nobody else would fight for. She built something that proves compassion can be stronger than cruelty and stubbornness can change the world. After everyone left, Charlotte stayed at the grave, looking down at the valley where Mercy Ridge continued its work. Martha found her there an hour later. "You all right?" "I never got to thank her properly," Charlotte said, "for giving me this chance." "She didn't need thanks. She just needed you to use what she taught you to help the next person who needs it." "I will," Charlotte promised. "We all will." And they did. The settlements kept growing, kept adapting, kept saving lives in places where formal medicine wouldn't reach. Lydia's journals became foundational texts that medical students studied alongside traditional anatomy books. Her techniques spread so far that eventually nobody remembered they'd come from an uneducated woman in the mountains. They were just accepted practice. 50 years after her death, a medical college was established in what had once been Black Ash Ridge. The town had grown, civilized itself, forgotten most of its violent past. The college was named Mercer Institute of Frontier Medicine. They put a statue in the courtyard, a woman with scarred hands and determined eyes holding medical tools that would have been primitive by modern standards, but had saved hundreds of lives when they were all anyone had. The plaque read, Lydia Mercer, 1826 to 1897. She proved that medicine belongs to anyone willing to learn it, and compassion belongs to everyone brave enough to practice it. Students walked past it every day, most not knowing the real story, not knowing about Black Ash Ridge or the Saloon or the broken glass, not knowing about Elias or the mountains or the years of fighting just to exist. But some knew. The ones who came from poverty, from abuse, from situations where the world had told them they were worthless. They looked at that statue and saw proof that being unwanted didn't mean being unable. That the person everyone mocks today might become the person everyone remembers tomorrow. And in the mountains above where Mercy Ridge still operated, smaller now, absorbed into formal medical systems but still providing care to anyone who needed it, Charlotte taught a new generation of healers using methods Lydia had pioneered. Why do we do this work? Charlotte asked her students on their first day. A young woman in the back, poor, scared, running from something she wouldn't talk about yet, raised her hand tentatively. Because people matter, the girl said quietly. Even when the world says they don't. Charlotte smiled. Especially when the world says they don't. Now let's get to work. The work continued as it always had, carried forward by people who refused to accept that some lives were worth less than others. People who understood that healing wasn't just about medicine. It was about seeing worth in people who'd been taught they were worthless. Lydia Mercer had started with nothing. No education, no resources, no support except one mountain hunter who saw potential where everyone else saw failure. She'd built an empire of hope from that nothing, not because she was exceptional, but because she was stubborn, because she refused to stay down when the world pushed her there, because she believed that giving people chances was more important than protecting institutions. Her story spread through generations, changing slightly with each telling until it became something like myth. Some versions made her more heroic than she'd been. Others focused on the dramatic moments and forgot the tedious years of documentation and political fighting. But the core truth remained. A woman everyone had mocked became someone no one could ignore. Not through luck or charity or someone else's validation, but through sheer refusing to quit determination and the radical belief that people too poor for proper medicine still deserve to live. That truth mattered more than any statue or college name. It mattered because somewhere, always, there was someone kneeling in broken glass while people laughed. Someone being told they were worthless, unwanted, unable. And maybe one of them would hear Lydia's story, the real one, not the sanitized version, and realize that being pushed down wasn't the same as staying down. That sometimes the person who changes the world is just the person who refused to let the world break them. That compassion given to the powerless can be more revolutionary than any war. That all it takes is one person willing to believe you matter, even if that person is yourself. The mountains stood eternal, holding the bones of two people who'd built something impossible together. Snow fell and melted and fell again. Seasons changed. The world kept moving. But on a ridge overlooking a valley where people still learned to heal each other, two simple graves remained. One marked Elias Boone. Hunter, teacher, the man who gave chances. The other marked Lydia Mercer, healer, builder, the woman who refused to quit. Together they'd proven something the civilized world didn't want to accept, that the people society throws away are often the ones who build the future worth having, and that legacy, messy, imperfect, carried forward by flawed people doing difficult work, was worth more than any amount of formal recognition could ever be. It was enough. It had always been enough.